Oui, bon matin à tous. Pas évident de dire quelques mots après le ministre Champagne, qui est toujours très, très dynamique. Donc, les fonds de recherche, mon nom est Rémi Quirion, scientifique en chef du Québec et PDG des fonds de recherche du Québec. Très heureux d'être associé avec cette session aujourd'hui. Étant donné qu'on est un peu en retard, je vais être très, très bref. Là, j'avais peut-être une quinzaine de minutes de texte, mais je vais diminuer ça à une ou deux minutes. Donc, le secteur de l'intelligence artificielle, l'intelligence, tout ce qui est génératif, ça bouge très vite. Il y a des défis du côté de nos sociétés là-dedans et les panélistes vont en parler davantage dans quelques minutes. Un des éléments qui nous inquiète, la désinformation, les fausses nouvelles et comment la science, comment la recherche peut aider à combattre ces phénomènes de désinformation, de fausses nouvelles, afin d'aider les décideurs politiques, le secteur privé, le secteur académique à prendre les meilleures décisions possibles. Donc vraiment, aujourd'hui, c'est la thématique, c'est la discussion de nos experts. Qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait faire, qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire pour s'assurer que la science est très présente pour aider nos décideurs à prendre les meilleures décisions possibles. Et c'est certain que l'intelligence artificielle va avoir des impacts dans tous les secteurs. Dans quelques années, le monde va être très différent de ce qu'on a aujourd'hui. Donc, on a bien hâte d'entendre nos collègues, les membres du panel, pour nous donner peut-être des précisions sur où on devrait aller au cours des prochaines années dans ce secteur-là. Merci bien. À vous la parole.
Hi, everyone. That is quite a hard act to follow, the minister, but I'm going to try and do my best. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to get straight into it and introduce the amazing panelists I have on stage with me. I'm going to start to my left, and I'm going to read so that I don't miss any of their achievements. So we have Lambert. Hogenhout is the Chief Data and AI at the United Nations. He's also an author and advisor of AI strategy and responsible use of technology. We have Stephen Toope, who is the President and CEO of Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, CIFAR. Stephen is President and CEO and previously was served as the 346th Vice Chancellor of the University of Cambridge and the first non-UK national to hold the post. Next, we have Dr. Nadia Naffi, who is an Associate Professor of Educational Technology at the University of Laval and holds the National Bank Chair in Educational Leadership for Innovation Pedagogical Practices in Digital Contexts. And last, but definitely not least, is Valérie. Hi, Valérie. Is the president and CEO of MILA, Quebec AI Institute. MILA is recognized as a global leader in scientific advances that inspires innovation and the development of AI for the benefit of all. And then there's myself. I'm Takara Small. You may have heard me putting a voice to a face. I'm a technology columnist for CBC and the tech contributor for the BBC World News Service. And I'm not sick. I just have a Taylor Swift concert that I cannot miss. Thank you to the 5 people who laughed at that joke. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's get started. These first question is going to be aimed at Nadia and Valérie. Canada is one of the powerhouses in AI. And right now we're seeing such innovation in the public and in the private space. And it begs the question, why, particularly when it comes to federal government funds and public support, should we continue to spend money on research in this particular space? Nadia, go to you first.
So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna use my iPad just to make sure not to forget any of my points. So first of all, thank you for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be here with you. Trust is the foundation of our interactions and societal harmony. It involves believing that someone or something will act in our best interest. It is both rational and emotional. People everywhere we know are facing today significant challenges: global aggression, inflation, problems with healthcare systems, the lingering uncertainty and lies from COVID-19 years. All have made people desperate for trust and hope, making them easy targets for disinformation and fast to misplace their trust. We all know also that disinformation strategically exploits fears, ignorance, vulnerabilities, playing on people's worries, beliefs, and leads to social unrest, riots, and even violence. And having economic hardships combined with the rise of synthetic content like deepfakes complicate the information landscape further by making it harder for the public to distinguish between truth and falsehood. And we also know, and I will finish with this context, is that deepfakes is not only targeting voters and elections, it's really targeting all groups. So businesses are particularly worried about deepfakes and AI-driven fraud. The elderly are being targeted with deepfake messages from loved ones. Andras AI, an application that is being used to target teenagers in schools. Gender's disinformation worsens issues around credibility and trust, particularly targeting women, their reputation and expertise. And here where I bring research. I'm coming from education, and for me and the research that I'm doing is really looking at how we can, giving that for now, legal solutions, technological solutions are not really saving us, or we don't have 100% answer with all these interventions. We absolutely need to have human centrics. We really need to have human interventions. We really need to work on our citizens to equip them with digital skills, etc. So in addition to that, we absolutely need to not only work on the digital skills like the literacy, but also the digital agency. We can't just rely on now citizens who will be able to detect the false information and protect themselves. We actually need them to be actively involved in stopping deepfakes from spreading, right? And really protecting the whole community. And in order to do that, we need education interventions and we need research to make sure that whatever we're really suggesting and trying has concrete impact. So this is from one side. The other side, and I will go very quickly, is that also in our research, we need to look at we can address this information and try to stop it. But we, as I said before, it's, when we talk about the groups that working with disinformation and spreading it, we know that they are targeting very specific vulnerabilities. So in order to have long-term solutions, we need to attack this from its root causes to really understand what makes people believe what they believe and make them, vulnerable to specific information. And this is another research that we really need to, that will inform us to stop the problem from its roots.
I think that's so interesting, particularly because a lot of the time the conversation is focused on private versus public, where this is an issue that impacts both groups, financially and socially. And of course, there's an upcoming election, so it's more apt now than ever before. But Valérie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Prime Minister Trudeau recently said on a podcast that, and I think it's worth anchoring
that podcast,
here.
I know that. Yeah.
Do you know which one I'm referencing?
I do. I don't know if anyone here has heard it.
He was on Hard Fork, right?
Yeah.
Worth listening to, by the way. But he said something that I think is interesting to open up this morning. He said, the AI, the modern AI that we're all excited about, ChatGPT, Copilot, everything, it's surprisingly Canadian. Point taken. And then he also goes on to say, and many of us here believe, there's an opportunity for the next wave, the next chapter of Canadian AI. So what is Canadian AI? And we could probably have a 1-hour chat just about that. But from our perspective, I'd offer 3 things. Number one, it's an approach to technology that strives to honor human rights and some of the things that we describe as Canadian values in general. So we just do it differently here. Number 2, in general, in part because we attract talent from everywhere in the world, there's a multicultural, diverse approach to it that is much more connected with the rest of the world and a little bit less in kind of a silo or a halo. And then maybe more importantly, it's an AI that really is striving to bring benefits to the world. And in this kind of pivot that we're in right now, where almost every sphere of our life is going to be touched, enhanced, driven by AI-powered technologies, the next chapter for Canadian AI is probably around the safety side of it, in addition to the capability side of it, right? So capability is, building algorithms that are able to do really funky, fun, powerful things. a lot of them already exist and are being used and deployed in products and services that we're already using. But the safety side hasn't been looked at a lot. And it brings us back to the title of the conference, which is trust. So I trust that I can, I'll put my family in a plane, or I'll trust that I'm buying and using a drug, or I'll trust that the food I'm buying at the supermarket is safe for my family, because I know there's research that's been done around safety, and I know that government is honoring certain standards. And I think that's some of what we need to see in AI in general in the world right now to feed some of this trust. That's the backbone of how we operate as society. And I think this is one of the unique opportunities for Canada, and why, yes, we absolutely do need to invest. And maybe this is one of the strategic pieces that we want to participate in the broader kind of international scheme of things.
And I just want to follow up with a question really quickly. Why do you think the average Canadian isn't aware of the massive role that Canada plays in the AI space? So, for instance, when I'm interviewing individuals like yourself, it's quite obvious. But my man on the street, or is the person doesn't understand the incredible role and investment. Are we too humble? What's going on?
Part of it is humility. Part of it, I used to work at Cirque du Soleil, and when you step out of a Cirque du Soleil show, everyone talks about the 15 to 20 artists that were on scene, but there are 100 people backstage kind of making it all happen, in addition to the 1,000 people in the head office. I think part of it is that the work of a researcher generally is not one of, front stage center. It's one of, hard work, and people like Joshua Benjo today are celebrated. He was a crazy guy for a really long time in a really small office at University of Montreal, and was lucky that the government of Canada thought that was worth putting a couple of bucks into. And today he's, we all line up to go see him talk, but that's not what research is. You do it in service of.
Yes.
And so I think that's part of it. And actually it's kind of fun that today we're in a society that is kind of inviting researchers and scientists back into the conversation and say, okay, we need to hear from you. We want to hear from you. And certainly with the recent events in AI, yes, you're seeing a lot of scientists saying, I want the mic. I want to talk about this technology I've built, and I want to make people aware of where it comes from, what it's able to do, and what might happen in the future.
Which I think is a great tie-in to my next question, which is we're seeing an increasing concentration of AI, specifically in big tech. I'm not going to name the companies, but I think we can all in our heads imagine which ones are playing an outsized role. I'd love to, Stephen, talk to me a little bit about what effect that has, if any, and what that could lead to in the future.
I think it does have an effect. I think it helps to generate a sense of anxiety, which we do see in our society around new technologies. There is nervousness about the deployment of technologies. There's nervousness about privacy. There's nervousness about who's benefiting from the evolution of the tremendous technologies that are being created, including in artificial intelligence. And I think that what happens then is if you take the nervousness about how it's going to be deployed, and then you add to that a tremendous concentration of power in the hands of a limited number of companies, it's a recipe for distrust, I think. But there is some good news.
Thank God.
And I think the good news is if you look at, for example, the Edelman Trust Barometer from 2024, it's fascinating that when asked about the implementation of new technologies, who do people trust? Well, maybe the bad news is the first answer is people like me. So that's a risk, because people like me can be exploited by technologies, by deep fakes, etc. You come to think that it's only other people who share my own worldview that I should trust. However, the good news is an equal number of people say that who should we trust? It's not big tech. It's not even government. It's actually scientists and ethicists. So there is a recognition that people who do research, and this is why it is so important, have a role to play in helping to reaffirm the trust principles within all new technologies. My own organization, CIFAR, actually invests a lot in this. We work with the 3 national AI institutes, including MILA, where Valérie works. We actually partner on, for example, a whole suite of activities that are designed designed to create public policy advice for government about how to regulate effectively around children, how to regulate around healthcare and privacy, et cetera, et cetera. If you look on our CIFAR website, you'll see some papers that have been produced along those lines. I think those kinds of investments in AI safety, and it's not just about policy, it's also about how AI itself is built. And so many of our researchers are really committed to trying to figure out how to build AI that is, from the start, focused on privacy and focused on trust.
Lambert, same question.
Yeah, I think in the past 2 decades, we've seen this amazing dynamic where the kind of power and the kind of market capitalization that usually was reserved for national governments is now resides with large companies.
Yes.
And that creates a really dangerous situation, I think.
Yeah.
There's a Canadian science fiction author, Carl Schroeder, who said something at some point. He said, every technology comes with an implied political agenda. And I think that's something worth keeping in mind, that when a company provides you with an interesting social network or with AI technology. And another example is space technology, something that before only governments could do, and now it's mostly private companies that are sending rockets to space. And we have to think about what are their motivations and what are the principles that they're abiding by. And I think you can imagine a spectrum where you say on the easiest side of the spectrum, there's something like tissues. And if a company called Kleenex corners the market on tissues, it's not a big problem, right? On the other side of the spectrum, you have something like electricity that we all depend on. Mm-hmm. And those things are regulated. The companies that provide electricity, they have to make sure that they provide access to everyone. They have to have fair pricing. And, there's other rules as well that they need to abide by. Safety, certain safety standards, etc. Mm-hmm. Now we have to ask ourselves, these technologies like social networks or AI, where do they sit on that spectrum? And what kind of regulation is needed?
I just want to add something quickly, because I think one of the things we're not talking enough about is the accountability loop. And right now we're not in a really good position with the big tech companies, the digital world in general. And, the internet was amazing because it didn't belong to anyone and it belonged to everyone, and it was kind of a crazy idea, but it did work. And then big tech companies came in and said, oh, no, we're going to use this, universal platform that reaches billions of people overnight. And we're going to, create things like Facebook that, great, we're going to democratize access to information and people will be connected around the world. But there was never an accountability loop. So if something happens in this industry of big tech, who is held accountable? Mm-hmm. And this was baby AI. This was the baby version of, and we're tipping into right now we have a very able teenager and we're tipping into the world of adults. And that's something I think we need to be talking more about, because part of trust is I know if something bad happens, someone will be held accountable, which means you're probably being very, very careful about not getting to that point, therefore investing in the kind of research you need to do, the testing and everything else. And I think that's one of the big challenges that we're facing, is how do we now build accountability if we haven't done so from the start?
Let's dive into that a little deeper then. We're talking about accountability and regulation in this space. How, to some people it might be like, the horse is already bolted and now we're trying to close the barn afterwards. How do you move forward with accountability and regulations, in particular when you're dealing with tech companies that have GDPs that rival some countries? And this is, as you mentioned, Valérie, a burgeoning space. We're reaching adulthood. What can be done? I don't want to be a negative Nelly here, but what can be done? What steps do you think should take place? And this is for the entire panel. Yeah.
I can start with that. I think one of the problems with regulation is that all of this technology is so complex that the policymakers have trouble understanding what they're regulating.
Yeah.
The other problem is that it's a terrain that is moving as we speak. So policymaking obviously takes time. It's a slow process. And by the end, when you've decided something, the entire technological landscape has changed already. And that makes policymaking very hard.
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree, and I think there is a fundamental challenge for anyone who's trying to imagine regulation in the space because it is so fast-paced. However, I think one of the other significant challenges, and it picks up on your point, is that within governments, there is a real lack of capacity in technological understanding. It's something we really do have to think about, I think, in our current environment, because so much of the fast-paced evolution of the world is rooted in new technologies, scientific discoveries. I mean, we've got synthetic biology, you've got quantum, et cetera, and yet within government, there's very little capacity to understand these technologies. So I think that's something we've got to think about.
That is, though.
Well, I think practically speaking, it's because people who have been trained in engineering, sciences, et cetera, have historically not gone into government. And I think that's something that we've got to correct. I also want to make one other point. When we talk about regulation, there are a lot of people, running around the world now saying that we have to have a big international treaty on the regulation of artificial intelligence. I think partly because of the fast-paced nature of the technology and because the interests simply do not align. The interests of the US, China, Europe, other actors, I think it's going to be very different. My own area is international law, and I think it's going to be really tough to negotiate any significant international standards. I also think the problem that we face is national standards aren't going to be sufficient because this is a global set of developments. So I wonder whether what Canada and other states like Canada should be thinking about is kinds of coalitions of the willing, wanting to move forward with some form of regulatory intervention, which has to be subtle and flexible. But I think that may be a better approach than trying either to focus only on national legislation or on a global action.
This is all perfect. I want to bring us back to what's happening today. And you're saying that, everything takes time. But Monsieur et Madame tout le monde, our citizens, they are facing disinformation and deepfakes and now they are facing that. I have, in the line of my research, I have my team who is documenting deepfake cases, and it's happening in every context. Recently, we heard about the $25 million that were transferred because one employee thought that he was in a meeting with his team, and it was all deepfaked, right? We have elderly who are being targeted with deepfake audio. So all the solutions, the technological and legislation and all of that will be taking time. And this is the process of things, but we need solutions today for our citizens. Like, we can't wait. So this is why I think we need to think in a very systemic way and really think about how every single one of us in a very interdisciplinary, human-centric way find different interventions from all kind of, domain to make sure that we're protecting our society from what's happening today, right? While waiting for all the, rules and
The legal
regulations and all of
frameworks
that.
to be
Exactly.
decided.
But we need to act. We can't wait.
And I'll offer something a bit different. So on the one hand, you have the organizations, companies, big tech, yes, but also hundreds of amazing startups that are using AI to do just great innovation. And they're doing exactly what the world that we're in was designed for them to do. They're innovating, they're pushing product, they're interacting with their clients, and that's what they should be doing, right? And on the other hand, you have government. And by the way, kudos. A year ago, none of these conversations were happening. And since then, there's been Bletchley Park, there's been SEAL, there's been the executive order by Joe Biden. Stuff is happening. If we had moved this quickly on climate change as humankind, maybe we would be in a different position today than we were a decade ago, right? So that's all great. Now, the second word I want to offer in addition to accountability is agency. Somewhere in all of this, there are us, the billions of citizens of the world, and we absolutely still have agency on the horses Hell yeah, especially if you're in a leadership position.
I love that. Hell yeah.
Yeah, we're the ones voting for these governments, and we're the ones engaging or not with the products and services that are entering the world. When on earth did we all kind of agree that this was just happening on to us? That's my other big aha of this year. And I think, as you can see, this is coming from the heart, but this is the time to wrestle with this. And if you're in a leadership position, if we are in leadership positions, what a burden and what a privilege, because really we are the generation. We are the generation of leaders that, our kids and grandkids will look back on and say, you were there. You were there in 23, you were there in 24, you were there in 25, when GPT-5 and 6 and 7 came out and AGI kind of, whatever it is, right? And so we absolutely need to do the hard work, the hard, boring work of getting in meetings, getting the right people at the table, talking about what AI means for our community, for our family, for our company, for our organization, for our nation, and making those tough decisions and then engaging or not with the technologies in the ways that serve us. But I really this is the part of the conversation that is disheartening to see that we're not having more, is we absolutely still have agency. And to your point, it's scary. This is a really complex technology. We're not sure we understand it. The upsides are really exciting. And by and far, we should continue to want to reap the benefits of that. But we need to accelerate our own capacity to have these conversations well beyond anything or everything that government will do.
Could I just add one piece? I think going right back to your first question about what's the role of research in all of this. Again, there is really good news. There are people working really hard day in, day out to try to create AI systems that actually do in and of themselves address some of these issues. There's a great researcher out of Alberta whose name is Nadia Hegde, who's, for example, working on the development of standards that are built into AI systems that focus on fairness by design and privacy by design. If you can actually build the algorithms so that they are addressing these issues internally, that goes a long way to actually beginning to really create a different discourse, because then it's not just about a kind of Wild West technology that has to be regulated externally, which has to happen, but it's also about the technology itself being envisioned and designed in ways that actually uphold the values that Valérie talked about at the beginning.
I think we've kind of, Lambert, please.
And I think that is a very good cue for CEOs of companies that are trying to use AI and are thinking, what can we do to make sure we do this in the right way? These principles, like privacy by design, are very wise approaches to using AI. It's very tempting these days that the capacity to collect data about your customers, your partners, the public in general has increased, and the capacity to process that data has increased as well. And it's very tempting to start doing all kinds of things with that. The risk for companies is that they will lose at some point the trust of their customers and their partners and the public. And that can create a huge backlash and it can ruin the reputation of a company. So I think these principles that Stephen talked about are really important to look at for CEOs of companies. Yeah.
It's interesting because I was thinking of that word trust as well. I think, in one way or another, we've kind of alluded to or talked around that. And I'm wondering, how can you engender that trust specifically with the public when there is so much fear right now, fear over losing their job, fear potentially over their personal data and information. For some people, the ability to opt out of those types of services isn't possible, not if you're in a working capacity. So what can we do in this space? And what happens when the public loses that trust in institutions, in companies? It sounds like a recipe for disaster, but...
It would be an absolute recipe for disaster. And of course, there is a lot of evidence that there is less trust in institutions of all sorts. There's less trust in corporations, less trust in government, less trust in many, many elements of society. But I want to go back to the point that I made earlier, that if you actually ask people where is their trust, there remains trust in science, there remains trust in ethicists. So to pick up your point, CEOs and people who are deploying technologies have to engage with the people who are actually doing this hard underlying work to figure out how to generate systems that actually do not move towards the destruction of trust. There are ways of doing this. Deploying the right sorts of principles, asking the right questions, making the right promises. I think government has to do that as well. This is not going to be something that is resolved overnight, and there are real urgencies, no question about that. But the point that Valérie made, that each one of us has the capacity to make decisions that engender trust rather than destroy it, is fundamental in this area. And I think we have to always be asking ourselves, is my decision as a corporate leader, as a government official, as a university leader, is it likely to uphold the trust of my clientele, or is it something that could end up undermining it? And I think every one of us in society has to answer that question all the time.
I know, Valérie, you wanted to add something. I just wanted to also say that, for maybe, owners of private companies, they may feel that pressure. They may feel like they do not have the choice to stand back and have those important conversations. Investors may not have the patience that would be required for such a difficult, complex situation. But Valérie, please.
I just want to plus one something you've said a few times, which you reference ethicists, but to me it's even broader. So if you believe that right now we're at the beginning of a massive transition point in the history of humankind, where we're going to be technology enabled and AI enabled in a way that is just coming to be visible and to imagine. Now is the time to do things differently. And part of what is not happening that I think would be helpful is bringing much richer perspectives to the table. So for example, as a CEO, this is not a conversation for the CTO. This is a conversation for your CHRO, plus your CFO, plus your CTO, plus your customer relation. This is the time to bring all of these disciplines to the table. And if you take it from the scientific perspective, this is a time to bring people who deeply understand human systems, ethics, the psychology of individuals, the psychology of children, with the people who deeply understand the tech. Part of the issue right now is the tech folks are trying to have all of these conversations, and some of them are honoring, it as best they can. But that's, I think, the tipping point we're in, is we need to broaden the perspectives that are engaging in the conversation, because this moment is about so much more than tech. It's about democracy. It's about employment. What does it mean for me to be a human being and contribute my talents to society in a productive way? How does it mean? How do I engage with my family, with my community? So the opportunity is there. And to your point, there are people who are engaging on this. We just need to create the platforms where we're bringing much more of those voices to the table as we create and accelerate or move into the next phase.
Nadia, it brings me, I'm just thinking about something you mentioned earlier about how individuals are being confronted with misinformation and deep fakes, and sometimes more than once per day, socially at work, etc. I'm wondering, for people in the audience, stakeholders, leaders, public figures, how can they start to have these discussions, complex discussions about AI with members of the public who maybe have a very limited amount of information about what AI is and the dangers of it? Because I think sometimes in these rooms we use terminology, we use words that are very common to us, but the average person may become confused and just completely zone out. And I say that as a journalist who, I feel like I'm a translator. I'm expected to translate these complex things into, sentences that anyone, anywhere can understand. But
absolutely, this is an amazing question, because what's happening now, again, and we know it, right? I'm going to take you back to our citizens and Monsieur and Madame Tout le Monde, who are really facing all these challenges today, and they're going to vote, right? The thing is that with their trust, it's not like they lost trust, they're misplaced the trust, because now and even when we talk about research, we don't know what will be being defaked, right? When we talk about research and how disinformation will play within our arena also of researchers. And, today somebody can defake me and make me say something about my research that is not actually, nothing to do with. So all this area is being targeted. And the thing is that what we have discussions between ourselves, but we don't have the communication with the public, right? So what they need, we need to be closer to them. We need to really understand what's happening, what are their challenges, and really translate the information. In my area of work, I'm in education technology, and my students, this is what I do. I train teaching and learning, and all the learning designers and the teaching and learning designers, and now I'm learning experience designers, instructional designers, etc. And one of the things that we're doing is actually exploring AI, because what we can do now in training and development is amazing. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're using it in a critical, ethical, and responsible way. But the thing is that these discussions are happening within our classes, in education, our higher education. But the public at large, they're not having these discussions. And when we have, AI that is being implemented in a workplace, it's like a top-down thing, and they're not going through proper training. It's like, this is how things are being doing now. Your job will be, or your task will be replaced, but we're not making them, go through the transition and understanding the role of AI and how we can actually collaborate with these technologies to, optimize our
Be better
performance
society.
and be better. Exactly.
Yeah.
So these conversations are not happening, and this is where I think our role is to really push for these vulgarization, like really talk with our people, and not only, a top-down decision thing. And the other thing is that really making sure that explaining what's happening and really making them, when you talk about bringing people around the table, we need also to bring our citizens around the table and really have them be
Have that
part of the
discussion.
discussions.
I think,
exactly.
Lambert, you were going to say something and I interrupted you.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on what Nadia was saying, and I think one of the ways in which we can bring that into discussions and make it clear to people what is happening is foresight, looking 2, 3, 5 years into the future. Because a lot of these changes come incrementally. It's like bit by bit. We already used to the fact that with Photoshop you can change a photo, right? That's been for 10, 20 years, that's been the case. So we're used to that. And now you can do it with audio, with video, and okay, cute. It's all little bits where we lose a little bit. And I think it's not shocking enough to people to really create a societal discussion around it. If you look 5 years ahead and you start, and I try to do that in my role at the UN, and say where could this be going? And if you look at the deep fakes and that kind of thing, the trust that we've been talking about, what if you imagine 5 years from now a society where the concept of truth just doesn't exist anymore? I like vanilla ice cream and
Strawberry.
You like chocolate ice cream, and who's right? Nobody is right. We just have a different taste, right, when it comes to ice cream. And maybe the concept of truth will be like that, with everybody having new, different kinds of true or false impressions of the world, everybody having their own personalized view of the world. That's a shocking idea for society. What about human identity? When I write messages to my friends, tweets or something, they're all sort of matter of fact, kind of dry. I really wish I was funnier. Now I can be funny with AI. I can have all my tweets and all my email messages be rewritten by AI, and they become like punchy and funny. But is it still authentically me? And what if 5 years from now we completely lose our identity because everything we do is being enhanced or moderated by AI? Those kind of thoughts, if we start thinking it that way in a 3-5 year time frame, it's suddenly shocking, and that creates a discussion, I think.
I know, Stephen, with CIFAR, that's part of your mandate,
Yeah,
right?
if I could just make a very practical suggestion, I completely agree with Nadia that it's really important that we find ways of engaging with a wider public on these issues. And we can think about things like citizens' assemblies, et cetera. But very practically, we've partnered at CIFAR with Sun Life, and there's a wonderful resource which is now available online called Destination AI, which is bilingual and actually allows people to have a really thoughtful introduction to artificial intelligence, what it means, what it can do, what it can't do, etc. And this can be deployed by companies for their employees. It can be deployed in the education sector. These kinds, and there are others, these kinds of programs, I think, can actually help people start to become more critical, to your point. That really is a key element. So that's just a practical suggestion.
And, Valérie and then Nadia.
What's coming up for me in listening to all three of your interventions is, as we accelerate, how do we find a way to slow down? Slow down to educate ourselves, because you won't be able to have any of these conversations if you don't have, a minimum of understanding. And it's more than feasible, but, slow down in the acceleration to educate myself, slow down in the acceleration to explain to others what's at stake, slow down in the acceleration to imagine what are the different paths going forward and what that means for me and what that means for the things I care about in the world. Slow down in the acceleration to convene people maybe I don't interact with regularly, or convene these tables of different perspectives. And again, I think this is an invitation for leaders, especially in the face of so much complexity and uncertainty. So yes, agency, and let's rally, but let's rally in a way that isn't FOMO and let's do it and let's try to get to an answer quickly, but actually has the humility of saying, this is a really uncertain time, and we need to create space for some of these explorations that, if we don't do it, no one else will.
Mm-hmm. And Nadia, I think you wanted to add
just
something.
to share a very small, example of, again, about research and what I've been doing. I've been funded by SHRC for the last 3 years now. And I've been creating deepfakes with youth, and I'm talking about 18 to 24. So we can talk about, the risk of disinformation and deepfake and blah, blah, blah forever. But they stay, like bystander. When they actually do deepfake and understand the whole, process of the message and really finding the targeted, audience and how you can actually manipulate it and play. They understand the risks, and they understand how, they actually have to become agent, and not only, we find the deepfake, we scroll and we continue, it's funny, blah, 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 and we continue. They're actually, they transformed within 9 hours of working with them from being, aware of the existence of this information to actually people who said, we're ready to go into war, right? Like, we cannot accept that my grandfather or my grandmother fell into these. Now I've been funded by Obvious to do the same thing, but with elderly. So I will be starting this with groups of elderly to also go through this process, because, while you're going through the experience, you really understand how easy, because what we did is actually going through our phones and taking, applications, deepfake applications, and creating that with accessible technology. So it's accessible to everyone. You can do it in 3 hours, and it's perfect, right? And you can really fool anyone. So by doing that, I'm actually raising awareness, and we're transforming people from being bystanders to actually being agent. So it's not only the leaders who need to be agent, the agency of the leaders, but also every single one of us. I know that, and I will finish with that. My father used to send me videos on WhatsApp and telling me, look what's happening. And I was like, with time, now he sent me videos, and instead of telling me, look what's happening, he starts by asking me, is this real?
Is it real?
Yeah. So every one of us can actually, educate and spread.
Yeah.
It's good he's asking the question, but to Lambert's point, what happens in a world where you ask that question 25 times a day and you don't know how to answer it anymore, right?
Yeah. I am cognizant of the time, and I do want to ask the panel one question and get everyone's thoughts. What do you see as the future of AI, specifically when it comes to Canadian innovation? Are we going to, we've invested a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of brilliant minds are working the space, but is that the future? Do you see applications that we rely on every day becoming more entrenched, relying on AI, making Lambert funnier and funnier. I'll start with you, Valérie.
Yeah, many things could be said, and it's very exciting to see how some of the younger entrepreneurs in the country are, using this technology and applying it to areas of our society where they feel AI could really make a difference. As the head of a research institute, very excited about two things. Number one, the intersection between AI and other scientific domains. I think we don't talk about that a lot, but that's going to just create a whole, next wave of innovation at the intersect, for example, of AI and climate change, AI and, pick anything that you're interested in, AI and healthcare, AI and biopharma. It's going to open up all kinds of windows. And to your earlier point, Stephen, this is an area where Canada has always excelled and is just part of our DNA to be in that world of exploration. And the other, again, I think is AI safety. I think the world is going to need countries like Canada that have the depth of expertise, that know how to do this well, that have the credibility, that have the values, that have the international partners to mount a massive effort around how do we answer the scientific question of how do we make our systems safe. And recently, Government of Canada announced $50 million for our own Canadian AI Safety Institute, and that's a tremendous step in the right direction.
And Nadia, couple words on where you think.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, in training and development, we're actually, AI will be doing wonders. In education sector, it's even making, education more accessible, etc. At Université Laval, we're exploring with, and we have it now, our courses, and we have principles to using AI. So it's really, the tools and the technology is amazing if it's, again, used in an ethical way. Even deepfakes, we talk about deepfake, but the technology is extraordinaire. We saw the exposition of DALI, where DALI was actually, welcoming visitors. And in other cases where the technology is amazing. But the thing is that we need to make sure, even if it's safe by design, we need to make sure that if it fails with, in the hands of bad, people, to make sure that they're being stopped or something. And again, it's not my area of expertise, but we need to think about tools that are in the bad hands.
Stephen?
We better do something with this. We've spent enormous effort over now a generation to actually have a leadership role in artificial intelligence. It's now really about adoption of artificial intelligence possibilities within Canadian society and industry. But I want to pick up on Valérie's point to just make one further observation, which is the research that is coming out of Canada is extraordinary, and we have to continue to have that leadership role. Responsible AI, absolutely. But one example is self-driving labs. Tremendous work being done in the areas of molecular development, drug discovery, new materials, because AI is being applied to laboratories and allowing them to accelerate dramatically the kind of research that can be undertaken. Alain Asper-Guzik at the University of Toronto, one of our fellows, is one of the world leaders in this. It's just a tremendous opportunity, but we have to do it responsibly.
I think developing AI systems is one thing. Adopting them wisely in society is another. And I think a lot of effort is going into developing more and more powerful AI systems around the world. It's a very competitive field. But I think if Canada can become experts can excel in the wise adoption of AI in society, then they can really take a leadership role in AI.
I feel like we could talk forever, but I am getting very subtle signs to get off the stage. So before I do, everyone could give a round of applause for my amazing panelists. And if you would like to get in touch with them, they are all online, and as they've mentioned their organization, so please feel free to do that. And thank you again, everyone.